a sombering start to the show, losing Darren Dutchyshen. Obviously, you worked with him.
Yeah. Listen, I mean, a larger than life personality, and just one of the kindest, most generous people to be around. And, the Sports Center newsroom, it's an interesting place because there's so many people there working at computers, working on stories. There's a lot of chatter. Like, it's a pretty vibrant place. But when Dutchy was in the Sports Center newsroom, like it took it to a whole other level. It was, Dutchy was really able to bring out the best in a lot of people, and his energy was really infectious. And you felt like, when you were around him, you had a little more to give, and you had a little more energy, and you had a little more in the tank. And he'll be missed by so many people, not just at work, but in his personal life. And I'll give you one little example of how it is working with Dutchy. And, so when we do these Sports Center hits at the podium, we're watching the games, myself and the producer, Paul Medeiros, usually, and we're coming up with the questions, essentially. Like, we're the ones who are saying, okay, what do we want to talk about in this hit? Those questions get relayed to the anchor who's going to do them with us, and we go to the podium, and we either do it live into a Sports Center show, or we tape it and it's going to get placed into a show. And you learn very quickly that the questions, when you work with Dutchy, are just suggestions, because Dutchy's been watching the games and he's got his own energy and he has his own angle that he's going to take. And you love it because he was so focused and so dialed in, and he knew how to guide things really well. So it was always one of those things now where we would be there and we'd be talking, and okay, who are we doing the hit with? Is it Dutchy? Oh, okay. Then just, whatever Dutchy wants to talk about, we'll just, let Dutchy do it, as long as we have some video ready. So he's just an outstanding person and broadcaster, and he'll be missed.
Seasoned veteran. Hey, that guy's been there forever. Seemed like it came completely natural to him. He's one of the greats. And as unfortunately, on a day like this, you end up seeing so many people like yourself who have worked with him and know him just tell amazing stories and just rave about how great of a guy he was at his job, and just as a person as well. Just a good Sasky boy. It's a sad day in the sports world, no doubt.
Yeah. You know what? And you know what? I think, that generation of broadcaster, if you want to call it that, like when Dutchy was starting out, there was no, podcast you could fire up. There wasn't this whole like digital presence. Like a guy like that, like really had to get refined in his craft and harness it, and essentially like, start from the bottom and work your way up to the top, and, start locally, grind away, probably not make that much money doing it. And he reached, the peak, I guess, of what a sports broadcaster is in Canada, hosting that Sports Center show that he did alongside Rod Smith, and then, alongside Jennifer Hedger for so many years. Dutchy really became, the face of Sports Center for a long time. And, like it was a different journey than what people are able to do now. So credit to him, because, that takes a lot of skill and a lot of perseverance to get to where he got to.
An absolute legend, guys. Well said on that front. Speaking of legends, Easton Cowan, you're an OHL legend. You're a standard as well, Frankie. How do we not get too hyped on this kid again? Like, it just seems like another London Knights prospect is coming up, and it's hard not to get hyped when you watch what he's doing in the O right now.
Yeah, can I just say something about the OHL first before we get into Easton Cowan?
I wonder what you're going to talk about.
Rosie, maybe I'll throw this to you quickly. Were you a WHL guy, or did you go to college?
I did the college route, played tier 2, and then went down south.
Okay. So when you turned pro, would you you see the OHL guys, you see the QMJHL guys, were you one of those Western guys that like to talk about how nails it is out West, and how, there was, fights on the way to fights, and the game was just way too hard for you OHL guys? Was that you?
Not to that degree, but yeah, I would favor the WHL and the way they play over out West than they do in the Q and the O. Yep.
So we've been doing the CHL playoffs on TSN, and listen, the OHL series was a blowout. Easton Cowan was a massive part of that. The QMJHL series was a blowout in Drummondville over Baie-Comeau, and the WHL series ended up being a sweep as well. It's the first time in history that all three championship series were a sweep. But there was a big fight in Game 2 of the WHL finals, and we came on camera, myself and Julia Teixeira. And I basically admitted, like, that fight, that was like two heavies kind of going at it, throwing haymakers. That would not happen in the finals in the OHL. I'd be the first one to admit it. So all these WHL guys over the course of my career that said, like, it's different out west. We're just built different. I think they're vindicated after watching that. As far as Easton Cowan goes, I mean, listen, that's a London team that was primed and ready to win. And they got to the finals last year on a team that wasn't really supposed to be, knocking on that door, and they did. And Easton Cowan has, kind of taken all the momentum that he built up last year that really put him on the map and ended up making him a first-round pick. He's taken that momentum and kind of rolled it into this year and just became like a truly unstoppable force in the OHL this year and in the playoffs especially. So it's an exciting time if you're a Leafs fan because you have this fresh new crop of kids that are coming up, which, you probably couldn't say that since the kind of like Marner, Matthews, Nylander era. So it's exciting. And Easton Cowan obviously is the one leading the charge with that excitement.
For sure. I would say, I think that out in the OHL and Q, they're too busy kind of tiptoeing around not getting suspended for saying a mean word. Where in the dub, we're just playing nails hockey out here. So that
right.
could be the difference going on there. But what do you do with Easton Cowan coming in as a young guy, as far as wanting to get the most out of his development, not putting him in the limelight too soon? It's a different market in Toronto, obviously. Do you think they got to be careful with that at all?
Yeah, I do think in a way, yes. How do you go about doing that is interesting because, I think a lot of the comparisons now are going to be to Mitch Marner, and Mitch Marner didn't play his first year after getting drafted. So his draft plus 1 year, but he played his draft plus 2 year. And so that's what Cowan would be going into now. The thing I would caution with that is, as much as Cowan is doing things that, Mitch Marner was the last one to do, Cowan is not a top 5 pick. He's a very good player, and he's going to be a very good player for a long time. There's no sense and no need to rush this player along because he's going to be very, very important to the longevity of the Maple Leafs and being a part of that. If you rush a guy along like that, I kind of think of like Kotkaniemi in Montreal, where it was like, we drafted him high, we're going to put him in, and this is the expectation you're going to play. And he almost like fizzled out in Montreal and plateaued. And, like he's fine, but not necessarily to the level that people expected. And the other thing with Cowan is, like, he's got room to grow physically. Like, he's not the biggest guy. He's not the stockiest guy. He's a good player. The only thing that, you would maybe fear, Rosie, is that you send him back to the OHL and it becomes a bore for him. And it's just like, this guy rips off 130 points, and it's like, what is he doing? He's wasting his time there. So I think they're going to have to try and find a way to balance the two of those things. But I would be more leaning on, let's not rush this kid into the limelight of Toronto. Let's not rush this kid into the realities of the NHL, because it is very unforgiving, regardless of how good you are. And let's make sure that when the time comes, this kid is ready to go and there's no looking back. And I don't think you need to rush him into all those situations.
So with some time on the Marlies, do you think, like, in the American League, do him good? I mean, I know certain GMs like Brian Burke, for example, were so big on putting the Getzlaffs and the Perrys and the studs for, at least a half a year in the minors just to get accustomed to pro hockey. You think that would be good for him? I guess it depends on what he looks like coming into camp, right?
The only issue is going to be, like, I don't think he can go to the Marlies full time next year. Like, it's either NHL or OHL, because he's not going to be 20 years old yet.
Fucking crazy, man.
So because
I don't like
he's
that
going to
rule.
I don't like that rule either. Okay. I think that does damage to a guy like Easton Cowan. It does damage to a guy like Shane Wright, who had to endure, what he went through. Being around the team in Seattle, not playing, then, we found a 2-week window where we can send you to the minors on a conditioning stint where you can get 7 games in those 14 days. And then he goes to World Juniors. It's like, I don't like that either. I think the best way for the league and the Players Association to go about this is have one prospect that is exempt from that rule and have one guy who can be a draft +1 or a draft +2 and go play in the American Hockey League, because it'll do that player a little bit better. And you know what? The European players, they can do that. The American players, they can do it. Like, why can't the CHL guys do it? So that would be the solution there. But so Rosie, that's kind of where I'm going with this. It's like the decision is, stay in the NHL. You might not play every night. You'll be around the big boys. And then, kind of like what Fraser Minton did, right? And then you go back at some point. Or you just send them back and say, listen, this is here for you, but it's not here for you yet. I think if you had to pick one or the other, I think I would be picking just go back to London and play another year and really, truly dominate it. And please, for the love of God, don't become really bored and don't pick up bad habits, because we need you in the future. I don't know what you would be thinking.
I just don't like the disparity between the NHL and the Ontario League. It's a massive jump. And like you say, that those guys caught in that middle ground where you're too good for junior hockey and you might not quite be developing at the rate that you should be if you stay in the NHL. It's tough. And I agree with you. You should find some way to get them into the American Hockey League, because that's the stepping stone in between that's perfect for a guy like him. It's a step up. You're playing with men. It's a pro hockey schedule, a pro hockey style of hockey. And he's going to go there, and that's one more little step. He'll get used to it, start dominating the American Hockey League. How you doing down there? Sure looks good. Everyone agrees. Time to bring him up and give him some time, and you can go back and forth, especially in Toronto. The trainers just bring your gear across the hall. You can see each other practicing in that rink. It's that big. It's that easy to transition back and forth, but I don't like the idea of him being that bloody good and dominating that much. And I haven't watched him to a high extent. I can just see the numbers and the reviews, but he seems like he's outgrown that Ontario Hockey League. That doesn't mean he's ready for the NHL, and that puts him in a weird position on which path do you choose for this kid.
And this is no slight either, guys, on the OHL.
No,
he didn't really do it at the World Junior. And I want to see what he does at the Memorial Cup against the rest of the country, right, Frankie?
Yeah. Well, it's a good point. This Memorial Cup is going to shape up to be really interesting, because like I said before, all 3 teams that earned their way there, Saginaw's the host team, so they're going to be there. They're a really good team as well. But all 3 teams that earned their way there, they got there by sweeping the finals. So that would tell me that these 3 teams are all juggernauts. This is not one team kind of limped into the Memorial Cup. These guys are all legit, and it'll be interesting to see how he plays against guys in the WHL. They're that Moose Jaw team is no joke. That the Drummondville team is really well coached, and they got a lot of good players. That Drummondville team has a defenseman, this kid Vsevolod Komarov. He was the QMJHL Defenseman of the Year, and he's a drafted pick of Buffalo. I can see this guy playing for Buffalo next year. He's already probably NHL ready. Now, the thing with Cowan, yes, World Juniors would be a big thing. Training camp next year in Toronto is going to be a big thing. All these little stepping stones, you just want to continue to see him trend in the right direction, because that is why I believe, anyways, it was so attractive for the Leafs to step up and pick this guy, because he progressed so quickly and so much that it was we have to take notice of how well this guy is trending in the right direction. And I think, do you remember when Nick Robertson was playing for Peterborough and he scored, was it 55, 60 goals? And then he came up in the bubble after. And I think there was a lot of talk that okay, did what you can do at the OHL, you're NHL ready now. But there still is a little bit of a transitional period for him. And they're very different players for sure. But I think the kind of development aspect is similar, in the sense that it can look like you've completely dominated at that level and you're ready for the NHL, but the NHL is just a different beast. And sometimes it is okay to just say, we're just going to roadmap things a little bit for you so that when you do arrive, it's not this yo-yo, and there's going to be adversity along the way, but maybe you're better suited to handle that adversity. Like, so I think there's a lot of thought that's going to have to go into Easton Cowan's, plan, but at least these are good. Like, these are really good problems to have. Like trying to figure out how to bring your top prospect into the NHL because you think he's going to be ready sooner rather than later. It's a pretty good problem to have.
For sure.
Tell you what,
and I would,
yeah.
I mean, it's hard for us to judge because you don't know the guy personally, but I would be talking to him, trying to figure out where his head at. How mature is this guy? How many leadership qualities does he have? Is a big difference between, oh, he puts up a lot of points on the board. There's different people. Some guys can handle that coming into the NHL. I remember talking to Luke Shen, when he walked in and was like the face of the Leafs during that period as an 18-year-old kid, and his face is everywhere. And in that market, I'm like, how did you handle that at 18, man? Like, I get it. I've kind of been there and gone through it and seen how it works. But like, to be 18 and just get shoved into that market to be that in that role, and it's just water off a duck's back with him. It's just the way he's built, the way his mind works. Some guys can handle it, some guys can't. And so I think it'll come down to his personality too, and where he's at mentally and maturity wise.
Yeah, and listen, London is the NHL of the OHL, if that makes sense. It's like 10,000 seat stadium, a lot of more attention when it comes to maybe like media and in the town and all that kind of stuff. So if you ever were going to be in an OHL market that would prepare you for the NHL, it would be London. The thing is, Toronto and what Cowan kind of represents in this market is totally in a different stratosphere. Like, there really is nothing that's going to help you prepare for that. It is, kind of just how you're wired, if you're wired that way or not. And I think I look back at my time playing on the team, and we were not good. But even just the fact that every Saturday morning there is a crazy amount of cameras and people at morning skate and after the game, and it's different than when you go to some other market in the States and it's like there's a couple beat reporters and whatever traveling circus we bring into town. It's unlike anything that you'll experience playing in Toronto, even other Canadian markets. Like, Montreal is crazy, Vancouver, like all these Canadian markets are nuts, but Toronto just, for some reason seems to be the center of attention. It's different. Like, how do you handle all that? And, you can try and block all these things, right? You'll block all the major networks on social media, all the beat writers, so you don't see anything. But I find the algorithm, you can do that. The algorithm is still going to show you something. Like, someone's got something somewhere and it's going to pop up, and you're like, okay, if you weren't accounting for that, how do you let that kind of wash right over you and not let it affect you? So yeah, it's part of it. And I like, even my own experience. I was 22 and 23 when I played in Toronto, and I barely played. And I probably, like, mentally, I wasn't equipped to handle that at the time. And that's going to be 4 years older than Easton Cowan is. And if you're in your mid to late 20s, you've had more experience where you're like, I've kind of looked that in the face, and I found that I was able to get through it. And I can lean on that experience. Like, you need to have some of that along the way. But maybe, maybe he is one of those kids that's just naive to what it's all about. And you just play and you don't think too much about it. But that'll be a challenge for him for sure.
Hey, Frankie, I just came across the ticker. The Maple Leafs are going to interview Mike Babcock for the head coaching job. Your thoughts? No, I'm kidding. You're looking all around. I'm kidding. Don't worry. I don't want to scare you like that. If it is Craig Berube, you okay with that?
I think so. Like all the given all the other candidates out there, he has things that he's done that the Leafs are looking to do, aka he's won before. And like, the Leafs, over the last few years, let's say, the Leafs really shied away from leaning into one thing really heavily. Like, they had their kind of base core group, and it felt like the kind of periphery of the team swayed from year to year, where it was like, we're going to go with the really old veteran guy to help bring some leadership. Before that, it was like, we're going all in on skill, no matter how small that skill is. And then, from there, it went to like, I don't know, we're going to add a little more snot and change things. Like, they never really leaned into one thing. And I think with this coaching decision, you can lean into one thing and you can sell it and you can try and find a way to make it viable. And that one thing is going to be hiring a winner. And we need someone who's won before, because that's what this group cannot do, regardless of who is going to be in the group. That remains to be seen. And if your candidates are Berube and McClellan, and it comes down to those two, I see one guy who maybe, isn't the most known for being a structured coach, but he's a motivator and not afraid to hold guys accountable and call guys out, and he's won before. And I see another coach in McClellan who's structure, and it's all about structure. But his teams in San Jose essentially were notorious for never winning and never getting over the hump. So if you're just looking at it like that, you can kind of draw your own conclusions as to what the team probably needs a little more of. And the other thing I'd say is, structure is not and has not been the issue for the Leafs. Like we don't really talk, or I don't know if you guys ever talk about this. Like, you don't come on your show the next day after a Leafs game and say it's a bloody mess structure wise. Like they have no idea what they're doing out there. They have been structured. It's just, have they found the best ways to push the buttons of the top guys at the right time so they can push through and score goals and get the power play going? Like, those are the things we talk about. So with that being said, it's like, okay, what Berube has to offer as far as being a champion, and I think sometimes maybe that gets overblown, but that's the narrative. He's a champion. The team is looking to win. Some players need to be held accountable. He does that. Like, it checks a lot of boxes. And I don't know, like, Rosie, like, coaches can only do so much for you. Like, at the end of the day, like, the players need to be the ones that go out there and do it. Well, I think we make a bigger deal about coaches than we should. But if a coach, it checks off all these boxes for you, then I think your decision is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, to me, it's, you're going to have your structure. And to me, Chief, he coached me. He's not a huge X's and O's guy, but you need to have your forecheck. You need to have your neutral zone. You need to have your assignments in the D zone and kind of an outline. And especially when you have skilled players, you don't want to handcuff them to a really strict, regimented system by any stretch. But what they're lacking is an identity. Like, you look at the Florida Panthers, do they have an identity? You're goddamn right they do. And every one of them is bought into it, and it's look the hell out. And these guys on the Maple Leaf, they need an identity. And I think Chief's the kind of guy to bring in and say, listen, this is how we're playing. This is the attitude. This is what it requires. And it's energy, it's effort, it's heart, it's hustle. It's all those things that are hard to do. And I don't give a shit if you make 12 million or if you make 750 grand. You're buying into this system because it's what it requires to win. Look at everyone who wins. I know what it takes to win. I don't put up with bullshit. I can see through, the chicken shit hockey, and I'm not willing to do this and dipping your toe in the water. I won't accept it. Day one, throw that on the table, and oh my God, everyone's eyes get a little bit big and say, wow, there's a lot of expectations and a lot of accountability here. I better buy in if we're going to have any success. And if you can get everyone to do that with the skill on this team, look out. It's just what they've been lacking from the beginning. And that's why they shit their pants in the playoffs every time, because they don't have that identity.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the identity thing, because I actually don't disagree with you. And now that I was, this year calling games on the road, like I was doing a lot of Habs games, and so, well, it's all good. It's all good. They're you know what? It's a fun group. Like they're a fun group, but that's probably for a different show.
It is. Yeah.
So down in the dressing rooms after morning skate, try and talk to some of the guys, just get a feel for, everything, stuff around the league. And the thing about being a color guy is you don't have to talk to them with a microphone on. You're just talking hockey. And I asked one of the guys, what do you guys talk about before you play the Leafs? I'm just curious. Like what would be the talk and what would be the chatter before a game against the Leafs? And he kind of said to me, is like, well, it's all about their top guys, and their top guys really want to open things up. And if we can find a way to not let the top guys get going and kind of shut them down and make it a frustrating night for them, we feel like we have a really good chance of winning that game. And more often than not, we will win that game. And I think that's, when you talk about the identity or the lack of identity, that is the identity of the Leafs. And that might not be a winning recipe, where there needs to be something a little bit more there, unless you're going to be I don't know, unless you're going to be McDavid and Draisaitl and be, completely unstoppable on the power play. But that's their identity right now. It's just, it seems like if that's how one-dimensional teams view it around the league, or players view it, and that's only one guy, there's probably varying opinions of that. But if that's how teams kind of view it and what their chatter is before the games, I don't know. It seems like it's pretty straightforward as far as how do you shut it down.
Make sure to check out more of our content right here on the Leafs Nation YouTube page. We got long form interviews, we got clips, we got epic rants by Jay Rosehill. We simply have it all. And don't forget, you can find out much more at theleafsnation.com. Thanks so much for watching.